Hi, everybody. I'm Sunny, and this is We Gotta Talk, a live weekly digital talk show and podcast where we like to dig deep. Real talk, big topics. Now, let's dig in. Hey, everybody. Welcome to this episode of We Gotta Talk. It's episode 2 in season 4. And if you're watching live, hello. If you're listening on the podcast, thank you for being here. There's some new people I know that are joining the We Gotta Talk family. So welcome. We like to call it Real Talk, Big Topics around here. And this week, I'm covering something with a special guest that is on everyone's mind these days, everyone's lips. Ozempic, or a family of medications known as semaglutides. And whether it's a best friend of yours who just said, oh my God, you're not going to believe this. I'm doing this once weekly injection and I've lost 20 pounds. Or whether it's just the news coverage on this medication that you've seen, chances are you have heard that word. My guest today is going to be answering all of the questions that we have about Ozempic and that family of semaglutide medications, how they work, if they're really recommended for people without a clinical diagnosed issue, what actually happens in the body when we use this, the results she's seen with her patients, and so much more. So our guest is a nutrition and obesity scientist, a registered dietitian, and the senior director of global clinical research and nutrition at Weight Watchers. She's a faculty member and the associate director for the Center for Integrative Cardiovascular and Metabolic Diseases at University of Florida. That is a mouthful. Her name is Dr. Michelle Cardel. Michelle, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me, Sunny. I'm excited to be here.
Talk about titles, girl. You got it all. I love it. So gosh, you and I have been sort of back and forth trading ideas and thoughts on this topic for weeks now, knowing that you were going to be a guest on the show. Everybody's talking about Ozempic, Dr. Cardel. What is the first thing that comes to mind? People seem to have a visceral reaction too, like, oh my gosh, this medication saved my life. And we're going to use, by the way, the word Ozempic sort of as a general term. That could be Wegovy or, I don't know, Saxenda, whatever.
Yeah,
Mounjaro, right.
Anti-obesity medications, yeah.
When you hear that word, do you hear, oh my gosh, miracle medication? Or do you, from the clinical side of things, think, whoa, proceed with caution?
I think game changer medication, because this class of GLP-1 medications that includes semaglutide and tirzepatide is demonstrating weight loss and efficacy that is just unparalleled to what we've seen before in the pharmacotherapy space, and is starting to reach levels that we see with bariatric surgery. So really exciting for those who medically qualify. Mm-hmm. And like with any medication, you're going to want to proceed with caution, understand risks, benefits. How does this, how does your medical history and your needs, line up with the FDA guidelines? Mm-hmm. And ultimately, this is really a decision that can only be made between a patient and their healthcare provider.
Is there, there's so much discussion about who should really be on it. And we're going to use air quotes around the word should, because this looks different to a lot of people. There are people with a medically, like I said, a medical reason, like a diagnosable condition. And there are people who also need it, right? Or feel that they do for maybe that stubborn weight loss that never happened. Maybe they went through menopause. Maybe they had children in their body. So I want to know your clinical definition of the person who needs this medication.
So FDA guidelines suggest that anybody with a BMI over 30 or a BMI over 27 with a qualifying health condition like heart disease, hypertension, diabetes, etc. The medications were originally designed for folks with diabetes. So that is kind of like the FDA guidelines of who should get access to these medications.
And we know that it's beyond that at this point. Anecdotally speaking, it seems to be.
We
hang out in my neighborhood, it seems to be.
Yeah. So I do know, like, one of my friends lives in LA and she's like, everybody is on these medications. We've heard reference to it at, the these big award shows. Celebrities are either stating that they've been on it, or people are speculating that certain celebrities are on them. But from the FDA guidelines perspective, that is who is medically qualified to access these medications.
Now you work with patients, Michelle, who are sort of on their own individual journeys, right? When it comes to their sort of combination of medications and lifestyle changes. I want to know what people are telling you when they're going on this for the first time. What are they seeing? What are they reporting
Yeah.
back?
So, what the overwhelming thing that we hear from patients is this reduction in food noise.
Hmm.
So, food noise is kind of that like mental chatter that is constantly telling you, like, I need to eat, I'm hungry, feed me, like that preoccupation with food. And for folks who have struggled with obesity or struggled with their weight, their whole life, they say to us, for the first time in my life, that mental chatter is gone. And they'll
Mm-hmm.
say things like, is this what lean people feel like? On a daily basis, that they don't have that constant preoccupation. And for so many folks, that seems to be like one of the most overwhelming benefits of taking these medications, because it allows for the adherence to and the facilitation of those healthy habits that they want to engage in.
When you put it like that, Michelle, to me, it makes it sound like obesity or any related medical condition is actually, I don't want to say a disease of the brain because it sounds dramatic, but to hear someone say that my brain functionality is changing as a result of this medication, it does lend credence to that sort of philosophy, which I know angers people. When people are told obesity is a disease of the mind or a condition of the mind, there are a lot of people who will shake their heads at you and be like, please, it's a disease of laziness. It's a disease of lack of effort. I want you to, from your clinical perspective, sort of set the record straight on what you believe the root issue is.
Yeah. So, two super important questions. The first piece of what you're getting at, that hearing that these medications have such a powerful effect on people's brains and on their bodies, I am in total alignment of, I think that really provides additional support to these very strong biological drivers of obesity, suggesting that obesity is a chronic condition, no different than the development of hypertension or diabetes or asthma. Um, and with that second piece that you asked, I think it really highlights this pervasive weight bias and stigma that we have so prevalent in today's society, where we still, the mainstream media still tends to think of people with obesity as what you're mentioning. It's representative of a lack of willpower, it's laziness, etc. But the data is unequivocally clear that that is absolutely 100% not the case. I think we're in a transition period very similar to where we were with mental health, a
Hmm.
couple decades ago, where people were like, you're struggling with depression, like that just means you're weak. Like, just cheer up, you
Hmm.
know? Whereas now we recognize, no, like this is an actual medical condition that requires medical treatment and care, similarly with the disease or the chronic condition of obesity.
Yeah, it's complicated. I have listened to convincing arguments, frankly, on both sides, and we'll get back to Ozempic and its impact and sort of how it helps people who struggle with obesity in a moment. But I think this is a really important foundational discussion as we move forward, because as it relates to obese people who use this medication, I do think people consider the superficial use of this versus the medical use of this sort of two discrete categories. So I really want to dig into those with medical conditions first. And I want to understand more about what you're saying, which is a condition of the mind or an issue with the functioning of the brain. Michelle, what is different in the brain of a person, an obese person, that you or I might not struggle with? Is there something chemical actually happening?
Yeah, so we see that obesity is a really complex and multifactorial disease. So, how one person develops obesity may be different than how another person develops it. And in the scientific literature, we're starting to talk about obesities, like different types of obesity and what drives the development. But common components that drive the development of obesity are genetics. Genetics plays a huge role. Even if we all ate the same exact food and moved our bodies in the exact same way, all of our bodies, our
Hmm.
shapes, our sizes would be completely different. To the environmental piece, we live in what the scientific literature has deemed to be an obesogenic environment, where we have like we have easy access to very calorie dense, highly palatable foods, that really invite the excess consumption of calories. And then another component is going to be this physiological, metabolic, biological factors. It can be changed with things like medications. Certain medications drive the development of obesity. So things like that.
Yeah, I hear you out, and I agree and fully understand the concept of every body being different. I think as I get older too, I start to realize, oh wait, it really is genetics most of the time. Whether that's like how my kids are acting or how I am reacting physically to something versus a friend. I'm like, why doesn't this do the same thing for me as it? I believe that, but there is a question. There is a skepticism in me. There's one particular point you brought up with living in an obesogenic or
Mhm.
an environment that sort of promotes obesity. There remains a fact that we are confronted with the same list of food options available. And I know there are some sort of societal issues that play into this as well: access to healthy food, financial income. But there are skeptics out there who will say it ultimately does, in part, not in total, come down to the decisions you make. And I'm curious how, as a scientist, when you're working with someone, you make that point of delineation and you sort of, in a kind and comfortable way, say, yes, science is responsible for X percentage of what you're dealing with, but ultimately there is a decision factor. How do you address that? Or could they be eating romaine lettuce and it still be a challenge for them?
Yeah. So in terms of the socioeconomic components, I think the decisions that people make are based on the choices that they have. I think Sunny, you and I are both in a really privileged position
Hmm.
where if we want to go to the grocery store, we can go to the grocery store and purchase whatever fruits and vegetables or whatever foods we would like. And we have access to those grocery stores because we have grocery stores around us, we have transportation to get us there. And I think sometimes people forget that not everybody is as fortunate as we are. And some people, folks living in rural areas, folks living in really underserved or vulnerable communities, their options might only be the bodega on the corner where
Hmm.
fresh items are not available. And then you add in the resource perspective. So it's not just access; it's what resources do they have to purchase those foods.
Hmm.
Um, you know, One of the things that was really striking in this study that Dr. Kevin Hall did at the National Institute of Health, he looked at ultra processed food consumption and the effects on weight. And the ultra processed food group, um, did have really adverse outcomes related to it, but they found that it was much more expensive to purchase the foods for the whole foods diet in the study than it was to purchase for the foods for the ultra processed foods diet. So I think that that is always going to
Hmm.
be a important component of it when talking
Right.
about access and health.
Yeah, you can't really have the discussion, it sounds like, about health and nutrition without having the discussion about society, socioeconomics, uh, access and privilege, like you mentioned. But I did want to bring that up because there is a pervasive snottiness
Yeah.
sometimes in parts of the fitness, the wellness community that I know I have heard on podcasts or have read online that aims to be a tough love approach where it's like, get your ass off the couch. And
Okay.
it's helpful to be reminded, right? That it's a multifactorial challenge for people, and that it's not as simple for everyone to make those sort of nutrition
Yeah.
decisions. So,
And what's so great about these GLP-1 medications like Ozempic is that because they reduce that
mhm.
mental chatter, they're addressing those biological drivers, it allows for the facilitation of adherence to these healthier lifestyle behaviors, to eating, a more nutrient dense diet, to eating, less calories than you need, which ultimately allows for that weight loss.
Let's talk about the mechanisms, how Ozempic really works. What's it doing in our bodies?
Yeah. So Ozempic is really powerful and it's targeting both our like the brain centers of appetite. So there's actual reduction in appetite and simultaneously it's also slowing gastric emptying. So you're going to feel full for longer. So it's kind of this like multi-pronged approach that it's hitting both your brain and your gut.
Mhm. Okay, and so what's it making me feel if I'm taking it?
So patients report feeling like severe reduction in hunger. Like they are just not hungry. If anything, they have to be ensuring adequate calorie intake to make sure they're eating enough. They report food aversions to various foods. Like they just don't, certain foods just don't seem appealing or appetizing to them anymore. And, they also want to be careful, particularly while they're titrating up the medication. Side effects like nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, etc., can occur. And particularly with like really greasy, really high fat, high sugar foods. So there also creates a response because they want to avoid the things that are going to make them feel bad. So
Mhm.
there's almost like an aversion to those type of foods as well.
So it's making your brain not want what it typically wants, both in
Correct.
quantity and type of food.
Correct.
And, oh, here's what I always wondered too is you're on this medication for presuming you're a diabetic or a person who is obese for an indefinite amount of time. But for people who are on this or wanting to be on this for a short period of time to drop the last 10 pounds that they didn't lose after the kids or whatever number of factors that we talked about
Mhm.
at the beginning, is it okay for them to be on, number one? And if so, how long is it okay for those people to be on?
Yeah, so the FDA recommends that these are long-term medications. So because this is addressing a biological driver, the medication's only going to work as long as you're taking it. So the
Mhm.
recommendation is absolutely long-term treatment. As a parallel with diabetes, you know, we would never give somebody insulin for like 3 months and then, they get their blood sugars down, they're feeling good, and then we like take them off of it. If we did, we would expect that, the issues with diabetes would go back up, their blood glucose would go back up if we removed metformin, things like that. Similarly, what we see in the drug trials is that when you remove these medications, they did like essentially a 2-year study, and they had the patients on the medications for a year. When they took those off the medications, they had significant weight regain. About two-thirds of that weight that was lost in year one was regained by the end of year two. So, but there's a variety of reasons why people may get off these medications. Their insurance might stop covering it. They might not have the financial resources to continue covering this because it is really high out of pocket cost if your insurance isn't covering it. Or they might just decide that that's the course of action that they want to take. And so, in that case, it's really important to have set really healthy habits while you are taking that medication in order to try and attenuate or to limit that weight regain that we tend to see when people get off the medications.
Now speak to the people who are using it not for or not for diabetes, not for obesity, who are using it, I don't want to say casual user, but to
Mhm.
that group of people. Do they have to stay on forever in order to continue to experience those benefits? Or have you seen when working with people, or I know that you might not be working directly with people who don't have a clinical diagnosis, but what you're
Right.
hearing when these casual users are getting off, are they immediately gaining the weight back?
So I have not treated anybody, and let me be clear, I'm not treating anybody because I am not a physician. Where I'm seeing a lot of this is in Sequence, so our medical weight management telehealth platform that we have that Weight Watchers acquired, and then we're doing a lot of data analysis, we're doing clinical trials, et cetera, with these folks. We're talking to a lot of patients, so that's where I'm getting a lot of these insights. So as a result of that, I am not seeing recreational users
Hmm.
beyond, places like TikTok. But what I would expect based on the data that we've seen is that even if somebody uses this for kind of like as a jump start or to lose those 10
Mhm.
pounds or whatever it is, it's unlikely that they're going to be able to sustain that weight loss unless some really healthy habits have been put in place to maintain that weight loss over the long term.
It's such an attractive drug, though, for the people in that particular category, and I don't think anyone would deny the use of this drug to people who medically need it. But it is no surprise why this has drawn in, scores of women, and I'm sure men too, who for cosmetic purposes just really want. I mean, it sounds like the perfect drug, Michelle. It really does.
Well, and it's really interesting to me that people have that impression. Like it's almost being discussed like it's like this silver bullet, this like magical pill that will take you. It's not a pill. It's an injectable. You have to inject this medication into your stomach with a needle. There's a lot of people who, that is off-putting for them. It's scary to them. Also, this is a serious medication. There's legitimate side effects and potential risks that are, can happen with this. The nausea, the vomiting, the diarrhea that people talk, it's no joke. So I don't want people to walk away from this feeling like, oh, it's just like, like taking a vitamin or something. Like it's super easy, no big deal. No, this is a serious medication. And I personally would not recommend that people use this as as a recreational drug. If you feel like it's something that you qualify for, I highly recommend talking to, a highly skilled healthcare professional, ideally somebody who's board certified in obesity medicine, who has an ABON certification. It's American Board of Obesity Medicine. Those are the folks that are going to be most knowledgeable, most experienced in dispensing these type of medications. Just like we go to an endocrinologist for our diabetes meds or a cardiologist for our heart meds, you want to go to an obesity medicine specialist for these meds.
Right. So your job doesn't give you occasion really to interact with that particular type of
Mm-mm,
patient.
not at
Yours,
all.
but you're hearing. I mean, do you have friends? Like, you don't have to name names, but like,
I
I'm sure they're tapping you for
I have a
info.
lot of friends who have texted me being like, "So I really want to get in on this." People who work at med spas or own med spas, there's a lot of interest and curiosity around these medications. Um, but yeah, I
Tell me
personally
what you
have
tell
not
a friend,
seen.
Michelle. What do you say? Say I'm calling you and I'm like, listen, girl. And this
Yeah,
is true. It's been a steady gain of like one to
yeah,
2 pounds per year for the past
yeah.
5 and 6 years. And, I'm 40, almost 42. Like, I really want to. What's Michelle, the friend, telling me on the phone?
Michelle, the friend, is going to say, it depends. Like, a steady gain. Where are you at? Has that steady gain now put you at a BMI over 30 where you would medically qualify? I mean, two-thirds of, you know, 42% of adults in the United States have a BMI over 30. So it's not like this is, an unrealistic
Right.
cutoff. There's a substantial proportion of adults in the US who would medically qualify for these medications.
But people who aren't hitting those numbers, we need to
I
stay away.
I would tell my friend if they did not reach those numbers or have those medical qualifications, I'd be like, try something else.
Yeah.
There's got to be something else that hasn't been addressed yet, or maybe, and also just the reality of like as we get older, it is realistic that we are going to have some
Yeah.
weight gain. I'm 40 years old. I'm not going to have the same body that I had when I was 20 before I popped two ginormous babies out of me, And so I do also encourage some level of acceptance and
Mhm.
looking at your body as shifting our mindset to think about what is our body doing for us rather than this idea that I think so many women have ingrained in us of like it's
Mhm.
all about how we look rather than how we feel. How is it functioning? Do we feel strong? Are we able to pick up our kids and run around with them? Are we able to, do the activities that we enjoy? I really encourage a mindset focused around that rather than just like what size jeans am I wearing or what's the number on the scale.
It's admirable, it's a goal. It is,
It's
like,
also not
not
realistic
it's
for
not
some.
happening. Yeah, and listen, I joke on my Instagram and here, like, the superficial bitch comes out every now and then. I'm like, "You know what? I
Yeah,
kinda care that." And I'm gonna ask you to speak to the people who are gonna do it anyway, and they're not getting it from you, and they're not getting advice from you, but maybe they're going to a medical clinic or a medical
yeah,
spa, and, it's their right. Do you have can you speak to what medical not from a
yes,
physician standpoint, but what nutritional advice you would give them? Because if I'm that person and I'm like, listen, Michelle, I've made up my mind. I found this great compounding pharmacy, which we're going to get to in a minute, the whole peptides discussion. And I really trust this healthcare practitioner. I've decided that this is for me. What do I need to know
yes.
before I start going down this road?
A couple things. One, if you're going to do this, you want to make sure that you're taking a multivitamin. These medications really do affect your appetite. And so our goal is really ensuring adequate nutrition, making sure you're getting the nutrients that you need to sustain your health through that rapid weight loss that we tend to see with these medications. So multivitamin, one that has third-party verification, like the USP label on it. I think that's really important. Two, ensuring that you're getting enough protein. Because there's rapid weight loss with these medications, you want to ensure adequate protein intake. So that way the weight that you're losing is not from lean muscle mass. We want to
Mm,
attenuate the loss of lean muscle mass as much as possible, especially as we get older. So we recommend between 1 and 1.2 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight that you have. So say you weigh 100 kilograms, then we want to see you eating between 100 and 120 grams of protein per day. Three is ensuring that you're getting enough fruit and vegetable intake, enough fiber.
mm.
These medications can cause issues with constipation. And so, we want to help prevent that and also, just focus on an overall healthier dietary pattern. And then hydration, drinking enough is going to be essential for the constipation piece. And last is ensuring that you're engaging in resistance training at least 2 days a week, hitting all the different systems, and that will also help prevent that lean muscle mass loss.
So there are real potential side effects of taking this, even casually. Like that was a
Absolutely.
long list. I mean,
Yeah.
and if I'm glad we covered that because it's like when you tell your kids not to drink, you're like, I
Right.
don't want you to drink. But if
Right.
you're going to drink,
Yeah,
you need to call me for a ride home or Uber.
absolutely.
Yeah. And I think it's important to speak to that. I mean, it's interesting because getting into this topic and promoting it on social media, it's really hard to talk about this without one group of people feeling like they're being left out of the conversation or they're not being
Mhm.
respected in some right. Because I truly can see, I interviewed a woman on my Instagram. If I were a diabetic, if someone I loved were a diabetic, and we were impacted by a shortage of Ozempic due to Jane down the block wanting to like look snatched, I would be hurt. Yet if I'm Jane down the block and I'm 55 years old and I've lived my life and raised my children and I'm like, damn, I want to feel good. I feel like if it's legal and I have the right to do it, I get that too. So I'm curious what your opinion is on the cultural discussions that this class of medications has sparked, because it's really easy to understand sort of both sides of that story.
Yeah. I think ultimately it comes down to who are we to decide who is more quote unquote deserving of these medications. Folks with diabetes absolutely, need these medications. Folks with obesity absolutely need these medications. And I can tell you these shortages are not because Jane down the block who wanted to lose 10 pounds and look snatched after her kids are out of the house. That's not why we're having these shortages.
Okay,
Okay.
wait, pause. Why are we?
We're having these shortages because the demand for these medications has absolutely not been able to meet the supply.
It's
So the
because of
drugs,
Jane, though, isn't it? Is
I
it in
mean,
part because of Jane?
it's not. The
Okay.
biggest issues that we're seeing is that the um, the drug makers, I don't know if it's that they didn't expect to have such demand or whatever it was, but their factories literally cannot keep up with demand.
Right.
And it's because I said, almost 43% of adults in the United States medically qualify for these,
Mhm.
you know, and
That's a
so
good
you
point.
folks,
That's a good point because I think
yeah,
what's probably occurring to a lot of people too is like, oh, well, I fall into that category. Like I do
right,
medically qualify. So maybe
right,
it's not just, the person who's casually, as we were saying, using it, but
right.
it is the person who realizes, oh, this medication is actually medically for me.
Yes. And it can help me. And who are we to say that, you know, whether who is more deserving? At the end of the day, that decision is made between a patient and a healthcare provider. And if the healthcare provider supports that decision and that treatment, then I personally would never want to shame somebody for making choices that they feel like are best for them, for their body, and are aligned with what their healthcare provider is saying to them.
Yeah, I do want to preserve a lot of like sort of dignity and respect for that
Yes,
group of people too.
totally.
We really like to like in our society sometimes you look at things in a really binary way, like either you actually need this to live, or you're just some horrible superficial person who wants to fit
Right.
into your skinny jeans or whatever is popular these boot cut jeans.
Yeah.
So I'm glad we focused on that nuance. And listen, there may be a point in my life where I'm like, this is for me, and I'm going to go and I'm going to see whatever practitioner. It's not at the moment, but we've got a lot of time left.
Right.
I do want to talk about peptides or compounded medications
Mhm.
versus these brand name Ozempic, Wegovy drugs. We're hearing a lot of discussion about that. So, what is the difference? And is there something that people who are doing the compound pharmacy version, the peptide version, should be aware of?
Yeah, it's a great question and so important. So I would not recommend anybody go with a compounded version. The brand name versions of these drugs are highly regulated, have been extensively tested for efficacy and safety. And so we have a lot of data on these medications. On these compounded versions, I don't even know what they're
Mm.
giving people because Novo Nordisk and Eli Lilly, which hold the patents to these medications, have come out and very clearly said, we are not giving semaglutide or tirzepatide to, or like what these chemical structures are to these compounding pharmacies. So we don't know what is being given or provided in them. So personally, I'm not going to put anything in my body that has not been tested and isn't regulated. But I also recognize that there are major shortage issues. There are, major insurance and financial barriers to getting
Mhm.
the brand name. So I can totally understand why people are turning to the compounded versions. Um, just in my own medical, clinical perspective, I would never recommend them to somebody. And if a friend of mine called me and was like, "Hey, there's like this great deal. I can get this compounded version for like $100 a month or 200 bucks a month." I'd be like, "What is your safety worth? What
Mm.
is the health of your body worth to you?"
Can you even guess what might be in them? I don't want to put you on the spot, but is it a blend? Like I said, I keep hearing the word peptides being thrown
Mhm.
around. Like, what could be going in there? And moreover, again, if someone is choosing to go this route, What do you suggest for a way for them to screen for the safety of this?
Yeah, so in terms of what is going in there, I mean, I have no idea. All
Yeah.
I can report on is the data with supplements. So we know that supplements are not regulated by the FDA. And that's why I always recommend third party verification for any supplement that you're going to take, which just means like an independent company came in and tested your product and has ensured that what you said is in there is actually in there and they're
Mm,
not adding other stuff. Almost 100,000 people end up in the with supplements because things are added to them that is not reported in the label, particularly with weight loss supplements. About
mm.
a 25,000 people on average end up in the emergency room each year because of weight loss supplements. So you really want to be careful, even just with supplements, let alone a compounded version of these medications. If somebody is going to choose to take this, um, I again, it's not something that I would ever recommend, but just ensure that you're going to, a really safe clinic and that you're under the supervision of a healthcare provider, a nurse practitioner, or a physician who's highly trained in this area.
Another supplement that's been making the rounds on social media is berberine. And people
Right.
are claiming that this is giving them the same results as people they know on Ozempic, rapid, but they say healthy weight loss, decent energy levels. What do you know about berberine?
So what we know with berberine is there are some studies that suggest that berberine can be effective for improving glycemic control or your glucose levels. It could be a potential good option after you've cleared it with your healthcare provider for folks living with diabetes. The data around weight loss in berberine is really spotty at best.
Mhm.
Um, so this idea that berberine is kind of like nature's Ozempic, or people are expecting the same level of weight loss with berberine as we're seeing with these GLP-1 medications, is highly unlikely to pan out the way that they hope for. If you're going to
And
take berberine, make sure you're doing one that has that third-party verification, though.
and don't take too much. Do you have a recommendation on how much is safe?
I do not have a recommendation on that at this point. I could look into the research, and if people have questions about that, I could look into it, and you can do answers. I know you do your like Instagram
Mhm.
stories, and I could look at what's been used in clinical trials previously.
Yeah, I had to ask because I'm not even all that active on TikTok, and even I was seeing people post about that and it become a trend. I want to talk about gut health, Michelle, too. When you and I chatted, sort of in the pre-interview, we had talked about, we did in this interview too, the multi-pronged sort of causes of obesity, the reason that people end up needing to be on these medications. And we keep hearing a lot of the discussion come back to gut health. So if someone wants to be preventive in their healthcare, or maybe they even are obese or experiencing issues with their weight that can't be controlled, what is the science showing about the connection between gut health and weight?
Yeah, there's a lot of really exciting science that's emerging around the relationship between gut health and weight, and then a variety of other factors. This really cool study just came out from Dr. Karen Corbin's group, actually in Orlando at the Translational Research Institute,
Mhm.
showing that microbiome enhancing diet was associated with. Um, More calories basically being eaten by the bugs. So it's this idea of like there's literal bugs in your stomach and in your digestive system, and the bugs have to eat first. And so if you're eating a microbiome enhancing diet, even though you're taking in those calories by mouth, you're not necessarily metabolizing all of those because your bugs are eating them. So that's one way that it can be tied to your weight status if you're eating things that your bugs like to eat, like fermented foods, things like yogurt, kimchi, etc.
Oh, so it's almost populating your gut with that good bacteria. It's like they're burning the calories for you?
Yeah, basically, they're like eating them for you. So that's one component. And then we know that diversification in your gut microbiome is associated with all these really positive health benefits too. But it's interesting because from a what does this mean in terms of like how do I change my behavior to achieve like gut health?
Mm-hmm.
It's really in line with what the recommendations are generally, eating, enough fiber, prioritizing these fermented foods, prioritizing lean sources of protein, beans, peas, lentils, fruits, vegetables, whole grains. So, in terms of actual recommendations, it doesn't change much. But if you're eating a varied diet like that, that's high in this fiber,
Mm-hmm.
then you're likely going to see improvements in your gut health.
Okay, so it really is. Uh, it really is about going back to the basics.
Yeah.
I don't know why, Michelle. Like this is going to come across wrong, and I'm going to say it anyway. It feels like drugs are a cheat code sometimes, and I'm not saying that with any disrespect to people who medically need them, but I want to address what has become a real distaste toward the pharmaceutical industry lately, and this growing belief that they've become part of the problem. And while Ozempic has performed miracles for many people, I think there's another contingent of people who say, my God, it's just one more thing that we're passing off to drugs. And I know we covered on this a little bit, but I think there's a little more nuance to it that I kind of want to cut to. And I'm curious what you think about that particular critique, that there is no such thing as a miracle pill or a miracle injection.
Yeah, I mean, I would be in total agreement that there is no such thing as like a magical pill or magical injection that's just gonna, solve all your problems or anything like that. From the perspective of taking medications or, even thinking about bariatric surgery as like the quote unquote easy way out, I've heard that, I've been in this field for 17 years now. I've heard that forever. And I have to say, I wholeheartedly disagree. I have never, ever, not once had a patient come into my office seeking, um, my counsel for weight management or for obesity or weight loss that has not tried every, diet on the planet. I mean, you
Hmm.
talk to the patients that we have at Sequence, they have tried the keto diet, the cabbage soup diet. They have worked out, excessively at the gym. They have literally tried everything. And
Hmm.
they're basically coming at these medications. Oftentimes, it's almost like a last resort because, nothing else has worked for them. And I would say to folks, if you have tried all these different diets and it's not ever worked for you, then that is likely
Hmm.
an indication that you might medically qualify, that there's something going on with your biology that's creating a barrier for you to reach the level of weight health that um, that your that your goal or you're oriented towards.
Hmm. Hmm. Hopping back to those who are currently on any of the family of medications, we'll just say Ozempic, generally speaking. What else do they need to be aware of and monitoring that will keep them healthy long term? You mentioned things specifically like tests or things that people who are don't medically need this should do. But let's speak to that group of people who are looking at this as a long term medication, maybe on for the rest of their lives. What are you advising them to do outside of actually staying on the medication?
Yeah, I think the most important piece is to ensuring that you have all these healthy habits in place. There's no medication that's going to help you to eat healthier, to move more, to shift to a more positive mindset. So I think it's essential to pair these medications with an evidence-based lifestyle program that is going to help you achieve overall healthier diet quality, that's going to give you the skills and the tools needed to engage in the physical activity levels that you need, not only to attenuate that lean muscle mass loss, but also just engage in heart healthy, behaviors and physical activity. And that mindset piece, that mind trash that so many of us engage in. And like you were saying, like there's that part that sneaks into our head of like that, I think you called it like that superficial bitch part, that just like sneaks in there. But again, having those tools and the support necessary to shift to a more positive mindset, to think about, the big picture and think about things in a way that are beneficial to you and to your mental health, and thinking about a holistic health. It's not just about a number on the scale.
And will those who are using it for maybe less serious weight loss, will they inevitably experience that rebound of weight gain when they get on? And how would you counsel someone who's like, oh my gosh, I'm finally achieving the results I want. Now I want to know, do I have to be on this forever?
Yeah, I think that's essential. That's why it's essential to pair this with some sort of evidence-based lifestyle program.
Hmm.
Because if at any point you're getting off those medications, you want to already have those healthy habits in place that are going to help you maintain that weight loss when the medication is stopped.
Hmm. And we haven't touched on this yet. I'd like you to speak a little bit to the reported side effects, understanding that you're not coming from to this from a physician's
Correct.
perspective, but anecdotally reported side effects. We've heard all kinds of scary things or read all kinds of scary things online about some things people are claiming are happening to them. Can you speak to the validity of any of those or what you're seeing or hearing?
Yeah, the major side effects that we see are nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, constipation. The GI issues are by far the most reported side effects. There are, like any medication, there's going to be risk for more serious side effects, but they're very rare. And if you're working with a highly qualified healthcare professional, they're going to help mitigate that risk and work with you every step of the way. If you're experiencing certain side effects and checking in regularly with your healthcare provider, they should be able to either with titration
Mhm.
changes or by removing you off a medication that your body's just not reacting well to.
Okay. Is there anything else we're missing here, Michelle? This is such a multifaceted conversation that I want to make sure we spoke to every sort of group who might have an interest in this conversation. Is there anything we missed that you want to make sure we cover?
Yeah, I think you were really comprehensive. I loved watching your video clips of like, you like go up to people, it looks like in grocery stores and ask them, questions. It's really interesting to hear people's perspectives. And I just would want to remind people that um, despite what you've heard all your life, that, obesity is a result of a lack of willpower, laziness, the data and the research is so clear
Mhm.
that obesity is a chronic condition and it deserves the same treatment and access to empathetic and respectful care that any other chronic condition would require and deserve.
I guess as a quick follow up to that, do you see medications like Ozempic eventually impacting those statistics in a positive way and actually changing the direction of modern health in America?
So really, really cool kind of like top line results that just came out about a week ago, showing that not only is semaglutide highly effective for weight loss, but they saw a 20% decrease in heart attacks, in strokes, and cardiovascular related death, which is incredible. So I do think that where over time there's going to be potential to see a decrease in overall obesity prevalence, but also hopefully some changes in these cardiovascular or heart health markers, because at the end of the day, cardiovascular disease or heart disease is the number one killer for both
Mhm.
men and women in the United States. And if these medications are having such big implications for heart health, then I think that there's a real opportunity for beneficial changes over the long term.
Yeah, I hope that it's the beginning of a trend, sort of in a positive direction in that way. Well, I'm so grateful for your time, Michelle. Thank you so much for joining me, and for anyone listening. Like I said, the preemptive response to this episode was so great, and I hope that you guys found something in this interview that pertained to your curiosity about this medication or any concerns or issues you've had. And I do think, Michelle, I like to think we approach this with like good deal of nuance and sort of empathy for every facet of it, because there are, like I said, a lot of easy ways to jump to conclusions. But I think we did okay with that. So
Yes.
I
Thank you,
appreciate.
Sunny. I so appreciate that you come at this with such like a real talk perspective and you're not afraid to ask the hard questions. And that's why we love listening to you. So thanks for having me.
It's very kind, Michelle. Thank you so much. And guys, thank you. If you've been watching live, thank you for joining us. If you're listening on the podcast, take a minute and rate and review. That makes a huge difference to get these episodes out to people who might find them helpful or useful in some way. And that's it. We'll be back next week with some more real talk here on We Gotta Talk. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you soon.